This is the LG G6, and while from the rear it looks like a pretty typical dual camera handset, around front the G6 is in a class of its own, introducing smartphone users to the world of extra-wide, super expansive 18:9 displays. And while that space-filling screen is earning the G6 a lot of attention, it's far from the handset's only feature worth paying attention to. I'm Steven Shank with PhoneArena. We're going to take a closer look at that display, as well as the rest of the phone's features, as I get into my LG G6 review. Sometimes you only have to look at a new smartphone to recognize its pedigree. And there's good reason for that, as a familiar design helps shoppers connect positive feelings about old smartphones with the new, latest models. But while some handsets endlessly iterate off past designs, others dare to try something new and bold, and often risky as well. And to a large extent, that's exactly what LG's up to with this season's new G6. Phones like the old G2, G3, and G4 were clearly peas from the same pod, with their conspicuous rear hardware buttons, and especially those volume controls. When last year's G5 rolled around, it was clear LG was ready to try something new, and while it made an early effort at that whole modular hardware angle, that ultimately failed to pan out. It was time for something new. And new is very much what we're getting with the LG G6, as the phone presents us with one of the most interesting, and in a few ways controversial, handset displays to cross our path since the introduction of the curved screen. The big difference here, and what sets the G6's display apart from any other screen you'll find on a smartphone, is its shape. It's got an 18:9 aspect ratio, which you math fans will recognize as simplifying down to 2:1. That is, the screen is precisely twice as tall as it is wide. By contrast, the displays on practically every other phone out there have an aspect ratio of 16:9, the same shape as a widescreen TV. But the picture on the G6 is even wider than that. This decision has some far-reaching consequences, but when it comes to the handset's design, it means we get an extra tall display that stretches to fill the handset's face. The screen-to-body ratio here comes in at around 80%. While that's not quite a record, it's still a really impressive achievement, and this new aspect ratio lets you have a big screen while still keeping things narrow enough that your thumb can easily stretch across the display while operating the G6 one-handed. That also means that the G6 is able to pack a 5.7-inch display while remaining more compact than not just other 5.7-inch giants, but also the lion's share of 5.5-inch phones. Just look at how much smaller the G6 is than both the 5.5-inch iPhone 7 Plus and the 5.7-inch Galaxy Note 5. Another oddity for the G6's screen are its rounded corners. Again, practically every other phone out there is doing things differently, with corners meeting neatly at right angles. This gives the G6 a unique look, one that's helped by the way the curves of the screen mirror both the curves of the bezel as well as those of the phone's body itself. It's easy to feel a little resistant to this change. After all, don't we usually want a screen with more pixels, not one that sacrifices some without an obvious rhyme or reason? But it turns out there is a worthwhile motivation behind this change, as LG studied the forces that travel across your phone's screen when you drop it, and saw how those shock waves concentrated at sharp corners, leading to breakage. By cutting out the corners of the G6's screen, LG hopes to make the phone significantly more durable than its competition. To that end, the G6 is built around a substantial feeling aluminum frame. The design's a bit odd, with the edges pointing in slightly towards the phone's face, but it's a construction that works, helping the phone feel secure in the hand. Past the metal, LG covers the G6 in glass everywhere it can, Gorilla Glass 3 on the front and extra scratch-resistant Gorilla Glass 5 on the back. While we sometimes worry about phones that use so much glass, so far the G6 has held up to its reputation for durability, and at least in this platinum finish, the phone has kept looking great, proving resistant to picking up unwanted fingerprints. Speaking of fingerprints, we see the return of a rear-mounted fingerprint scanner like on the G5, integrated into a clicky physical power button. It's not the fastest scanner we've ever used, but it has proven to be acceptably reliable in our tests. If you haven't picked up on it by now, the LG G6 finally ditches the removable battery that's long been a mainstay of the company's flagships. LG held out as long as it could, but it seems that the trade-off you accept when you're able to swap in a new battery ultimately became too much to bear. Still, in a bit of a closed window, open door situation, while the G6 loses its replaceable battery, it picks up built-in wireless charging. Sadly, that's a US-only option, and international users will have to do without. There's another happy side effect to the sealed internal battery, as the G6 graduates to the world of water resistance with an IP68 rating against dust and water ingress. We've soaked the G6 time and time again, and aside from expected issues with the fingerprint scanner and touchscreen freaking out a little when water covered, the handset has held up to all that water exposure without any lasting damage. Turning our attentions to the phone's internals, LG equips the G6 with a Snapdragon 821 processor, 4 GB of RAM, and 32 GB storage. That choice of SoC may disappoint a few of you tech junkies, as while the 821 had been the top of the line just a few months back, we're already seeing the first Snapdragon 835 phones launch, and the 835 threatens to be a much larger upgrade over the 821 than that chip was over the 820. LG says it went with the older silicon because that's what was available as the G6 was under development, but it still feels like a less future-proof choice than waiting for the 835 would have been. We're hesitant to dwell too much on performance though, as our G6 arrived running some pre-commercial release software, and last-minute optimization could easily change the way this phone handles its apps. That said, our early tests suggest performance that's largely on par with other 821 handsets, like Google's Pixel phones, though a few frame rate hangups suggest that a little more tweaking could still be in order. Subjectively at least, we found performance to be nice and smooth, with little in the way of slowdown. The 32GB of storage is sufficient, and while LG will be releasing a 64GB model in a few lucky markets, expect the 32GB model to be the G6 most of you will run into. Thankfully, there's microSD expansion at the ready, with another of LG's unconventional side-by-side 2-in-1 SIM trays, now with a nice big gasket to help with waterproofing. Battery life, like performance, is another area where it may be too soon to make conclusions based on this early software. The phone's big 3300 mAh battery feels like it should be sufficient for nearly day-long operation, but our experience showed it running down much faster than that. We'll withhold judgment until we know we're looking at all of LG's final system optimization tweaks, but for now we'll take solace in knowing that even if the battery life lets us down, recharge times are speedy, taking just over 100 minutes to refill. As a good 2017 Android phone should, the G6 runs Nougat, and LG's skinning is tastefully lightweight, while also powerfully customizable. It steers clear of much in the way of gimmicky, unneeded functionality, and while there's a wee bit of bloat in the form of pre-installed recommended apps, we've seen much worse. Some of the more interesting software action happens at the intersection with the G6's 18:9 screen. Such a wide display makes Android split-screen multitasking a bit more manageable on not tablet-sized screens, and while the difference between this and multitasking on a 16:9 display isn't night and day, the extra wiggle room does help two apps fit side by side with a little more comfort. We also see the efforts LG's taken to keep apps working well on what is, for many, an unexpected screen shape. You can configure apps to behave as if they're on a regular 16:9 screen, a 16.7:9 screen, or the G6's native 18:9. You can try all those options until you find the one that works best for any given app, but don't forget to set the screen to 18:9 for those that give you access to 18:9 video content, like a few select titles on Netflix. When you're enjoying videos on that big 2880 by 1440 resolution screen, how does the audio sound? Well, the G6 only has a single bottom edge mounted speaker, and while its output is decent, it could use a little better bass reproduction. There's a much appreciated analog headphone jack present up top, but sadly we're missing out on a feature here. Some markets will get the G6 with a V20 style high-end quad DAC, but the US G6 is not among those. Our misgivings about that speaker carry over to voice calls. As a handset, the G6 works fine. In fact, its tall, not too wide shape makes it quite comfortable to use for such purposes. But the speakerphone leaves a little to be desired, with audio quality that's a bit south of where we'd like it. We started by talking about the LG G6's display, and now we're wrapping up this review by looking at probably the other big hardware standout for the phone, its cameras. LG's done this dual camera pairing before, putting a narrow angle lens up next to a wide angle one, and giving users the choice for each shot. That's worked well on previous LG phones, but on models like the G5 and V20, those two cameras had two different resolutions. With the G6, LG ushers in a state of balance, making both the standard and wide-angle cameras full 13-megapixel components. They're not quite the same though, as the standard camera gets optical stabilization and a bigger aperture than the wide-angle, but they're still very much in the same league. In operation, the G6's camera is a breeze to use, with a powerful auto mode, option-packed manual mode, and your standard variety of support for things like panoramas and slow-mo shots. The slightly more interesting stuff happens through what LG calls its square camera, which plays on the 18:9 screen by splitting things into two squares. One mode uses half the screen as the viewfinder, while the other half previews your last pick, or another lets you match two square picks for some fun juxtaposition. They're all neat and take good advantage of the unusual screen shape, but none are particularly compelling. Video performance is similarly satisfying, and in addition to familiar shooting modes like Full HD and 4K, you'll also find a few 18:9 options, letting you record video that's tailor-made to be played right back on the G6. Sadly, shooting in 18:9 means giving up on 4K or 60 frame per second options, but we're still really happy to have the choices that we do. The phone's video stabilization works nicely, helping to smooth out bumpy handheld shots, and the mics do an admirable job at capturing sound, even in blustery winter weather. The G6 shows a lot of maturity coming out of LG, presenting us with a phone that's beautifully designed, offers some powerful functionality, and manages to expertly walk that tightrope between giving us things that are new and very different, while not feeling too gimmicky, something the G5 suffered from. But at the same time, does the G6 do enough to outshine just around the corner competition from Samsung? That's a much more difficult question, especially as we still try and nail down performance and battery life expectations for the G6. If you do go ahead about thinking to pick up the G6, you're probably not going to be disappointed. But at the same time, if you want to feel extra sure in your decision, maybe wait to look at the phone in the light of the Galaxy S8. I'm Steven Shank with PhoneArena. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of our upcoming smartphone coverage.